It is that time for Michigan fans to gather around, bring your comments and questions. Welcome to the Voice of College Football Michigan and our weekly show. John is taking, I don't want to say the night off because he certainly got his business trip in line, and we appreciate John's work here each and every week. You're stuck with me. We got Ferris Khan here, who provides our Smashing the Numbers segment, and of course, TJ Konerski from Ronin Sports Talk. Bring those comments and questions here, talking Michigan football. Gentlemen, how we doing tonight?
Doing great, Mark.
Doing great, and John is he was at the breakfast show, your breakfast show. He's here now. It is after midnight. I think it's 1 a.m. in London where he's at. So
John is a trooper.
He is chiming in.
Yes, thanks for being here, John. We will try to uphold the standard here. And TJ had offered up a great start to the show here. So I delved into this the other day somewhat. I can't say that I've looked into it as much as I should. But of course, the NCAA is back in court, and they've been in court during this offseason nonstop. And this is probably the most significant court case that they're dealing with right now, involving the revenue sharing, what is legally the rights of the players to earn in all of this, and basically federal law determining that what the NCAA has been pulling off for decades is illegal, and that there is revenue sharing that is earned by the players, both from a name, image, and likeness standpoint. We'll start there because that's the crux and the core of this particular court case. And so, TJ, we'll start with you. And basically, the two numbers that I've seen, I saw most recently $2.4 billion. I saw a $4.7 billion figure as well in regards to what the NCAA would be on the hook for in compensating players for their name, image, and likeness, most of which I would think would be number two, merchandising, but number one would be video games.
Yeah. Yeah. So essentially, if they don't come to a resolution within 40 days, which I believe that was 2 days or maybe Friday. So, 3-4 days ago, they have to pay damages up to $4.6 billion. And obviously the NCAA is going to try to avoid that in any way possible. So they have to come to some form of resolution. So it seems highly probable something gets agreed to where universities will now be given the ability to revenue share, the option, because that's how it will be. You will have an option to revenue share with your athletes, your D1 athletes, and what they need to come to an agreement on a number. Right now, the number is anywhere from $17 to $22 million, and I hope it's $22 million. I think anything below $20 million is obviously an issue down the road, but there's going to be no floor. So universities will have the choice of so that's a hard cap. So I should have clarified that. The 17 to 22 million will be a hard cap. You cannot go over that number. Now, how will they regulate that? I have no idea. It's the NCAA, so I'm sure there will be tons of issues down the road with that too. But every university will have a hard cap, and there will be no floor. So say maybe a group of 5 school, or maybe I don't know, let's use not Oklahoma State, maybe like a Washington State. Maybe they can only do 10 million, right? So that'd be the floor. They can do whatever they want. The universities have a choice. And what they should do for a university like University of Michigan, who's not all in on the pay-for-play game, one would think that this would help balance the competitive edge with some of the tier 1 level NIL programs. So it's a very interesting turn of events right now in college sports.
Yeah, actually, there's to sort of link everything together. We have this backward facing. Well, what about all the players that didn't get compensated that needs to get compensated? And we've got to figure all that out, or this has to be figured out in a legal sense. But then we have the forward facing. Do we want unfettered capitalism, which is, I think, what we have here, or do we want to have some form of socialism, which is basically what the NFL is, and basically every major sport is, where there is some sort of restriction floor or ceiling kind of restriction in order to kind of play in the play with the other team. So I find this really, really interesting, and a good way to level the playing field if you're at the upper end of the playing field. Let's put it that way. If it's no floor, this is the into the future view. There's no floor, but there is a ceiling.
So, guys, if I recall, based on the numbers that TJ just laid out, and some of this is coming back to me after 48 hours or so, this would roughly be about 22% of the revenue.
That's right.
That is earned currently through, was that college athletics or college football?
College. So total athletic department revenues. So, but majority of athletic departments are supported by their football programs, some supported by the basketball program, but obviously many are running in the red anyways, like in Eastern Michigan, for example, they're in the red with the football program. So again, not everyone's going to even be able to do this. So this is really going to be a have and a have not situation where you would think the universities with the TV deals like SEC, Big Ten, some ACC, and Big 12, they're really the ones who will benefit from this ruling.
So that goes back to what Ferris is bringing to the forefront. Is this truly going to be a situation where this is going to be the final separation of college football, number one, from the other sports, and separation of college football within itself, that you can either hack this situation and this framework and you can support your athletes, your football players, or you can't. Therefore, you're going to play a different level of football. Or is there going to be some type of agreement to say, okay, here are some averages, and those richer programs will be able to benefit from the money that they bring in to disperse. However, there's going to be a balancing, a luxury tax of sorts, something to the degree that baseball does, just so everyone can participate to some degree, because either it's going to be determined that the Big Ten and the SECs of the world and a few other programs will run off and play their own brand of football, or they're going to lend a hand to other programs so that there can be more competition. I don't have the answer to that. And I'm sure there are various opinions out there within the power structure as to which way they want to go.
Yeah, I mean, I think the pendulum has swung very far in the direction of how can we maximize revenue. And it used to be the NCAA stood for something, in terms of the college athlete. Some peculiar situations, like Washington State was mentioned. Should Washington State suffer because they didn't get lucky and get into the Big Ten at the right time, or another conference at the right time, right place, right time? How are they any better or worse than Rutgers or Maryland or something in the Big Ten that came in? And then just in terms of the players, this is supposed to be something where it's supposed to be there's supposed to be gender equity. There's supposed to be Title IX. There's supposed to be all these other things that spread across the entire athletic department. I don't know. You're not hearing much of that. You're not hearing much of that lately. So it'll be interesting to see if football just breaks off from everything else. It sounds like this idea is a way to keep things in check, so to speak, and not let the ceiling get way too high with the haves and versus the have-nots, right? So it may be even in the same conference.
Well, really, it's a last-ditch effort to try and keep the NCAA relevant, because they know they're on their last leg, and if they don't come to some sort of resolution, this $4.5 billion or anywhere from $2 to $4 billion payout they're going to have to do will kill the NCAA. They can't do it. Tom Mars is very public about this. He's been predicting this for over a year. Who's a pretty famous attorney for those who aren't familiar with him in college athletics space. But when it comes to like the Washingtons of the world, where you had, or Washington States of the world, where you're playing musical chairs, well, the reality is revenue sports, or college football is a revenue sport, and only the top, only the top programs are going to actually, uh, they're going to survive. We're in an era now of college athletics where the big fish are the ones who are going to reap the benefits. It's just, and that happens when you're driven by TV deals and TV contracts. And I mean, we see what Fox is doing. I mean, you got the Ohio State game and the Michigan game shown on national TV. What other Big Ten school was given that? Nobody. Right? There is no equality in sports, and like that's gone. And then when you mentioned Title IX, so from my understanding, and there's a lot of gray area here because everything's not ironed out. The athletes who are going to benefit this are the revenue generating sports. So every athlete in the athletic program is not going to get compensation from this agreement with the NCAA. It will be the revenue sports that get the benefit of the resolution.
So to me, there would have to be a determination of how many schools are making that kind of money. And you would think that based on just television in and of itself, that those schools are the Big Ten and the SEC to start. And
Yep.
then there's quite a few that you could add from the Big 12 and the ACC that are significant revenue generating sports.
Notre Dame.
And Notre Dame, of course.
Mm-hmm.
So does a mid-tier or a lower tier school that plays football in the Big 12 or the ACC, does Boston College generate enough money?
Right.
Sure, they generate money. They get a nice TV contract, all of that. But then to turn around and to take a portion of that revenue to pay
Right.
for a football team that can compete with everybody else.
Yeah, you might see sports get slashed from athletic programs to save cost. That could happen. I mean, you would think, I mean, hypothetically speaking, you might see that down the road, right? You might see a team get cut so they can actually have a more operating budget, so they can actually give revenue sharing to players, because like NIL is still going to be on the table. So players are still going to be able to make money through, so like, your female basketball team can still get deals, right? And then, so that'll still be on the table, but you may see cutting of budgets to, like you said, 20% of athletic budgets are going to be dedicated to this. For Michigan, it'd be more like 10%, though.
Yeah, I mean the bottom line, maybe this is kind of a sweet spot of Michigan, because Michigan, we've talked for many weeks that Michigan is not going to go to the highest level in terms of dollars spent on players. So maybe some sort of cap actually, in a way, kind of benefits Michigan as long as it's a high enough cap. I think TJ, you mentioned that as well, right? That it needs to be high enough, right? So let's see what happens. We'd like to think Michigan offers more than, that phrase that we keep saying, transactional versus transformational. There's more than just the dollars. It's more than just the highest bidder. If that's the case, then maybe Michigan would benefit with some sort of cap that's reasonably high, that would be good enough for high enough for Michigan.
Yeah, I've got a million questions here, because one determinant is the reason that the NFL and other major sports have a cap is because they're running a business.
Mm-hmm.
So the cap is tied directly to the business formula. We run a business, and if we make $1 billion this year, this percentage goes to the players. That determines the salary cap this year. Next year, we increased our revenue by 13%. 11% of that goes to whatever the formula is, goes to the players, and it enables them to run a business responsibly. Well, if this is a salary cap, but if it's being, I think this was your point earlier, TJ, that the NIL is exclusive to this, and should be, I would think, no ceiling to that. You can't take money from players if private
Right.
citizens and companies want to give whatever they want to give. That should be limitless. So we're talking about money that's generated through all these other
The school.
Mhm.
facets that go outside of NIL giving.
Right. And then, so what you were talking about, like with the NFL and the players union, what they have is they have almost a 50-50 split in revenue. And where we're talking with college football, it's going to be about 20%. But see, the next step is going to be after this CBA players union. That's going to be the next step down the road. And then that's going to be a whole nother headache, because 20, they're going to find out very quickly. And these universities already know this, they know this. 20% isn't going to cut it. There's going to, once a players union gets accepted in college sports, we're going to have a whole new set of hurdles. But I think the reality of the situation is it's trending exactly where we all thought it was going to go, though. We all saw this coming, right? So we're just in the painful growth process where it's trying to find its balance. Water's trying to find its balance right now.
The other aspect of this is the distribution of that revenue per player. I wonder about the distribution of the revenue per player, and I wonder about the revenue as it pertains to schools. You just made the comment, TJ, that Fox sees where its commodities are, and so they throw Michigan and Ohio State spring games on television because nobody's going to watch Indiana's spring game on national television. So what keeps Ohio State and Michigan, once this becomes a very competitive field of dollars, who's bringing in the most dollars, how's it distributed, then why doesn't Ohio State and Michigan go to the Big Ten and give us and
more share?
Say you got to give us a larger share of this revenue because we're bringing it in. Therefore, we want to continue to win. Well, we can only win by paying players, and we're the ones generating the money. So we needed a larger distribution rate from this TV deal.
Yeah, I think that's a natural progression. And I know for a fact that internally, Michigan has already had those discussions, especially after what transpired in November with the Big Ten and what the other universities voted on to try and stop Michigan from playing football games almost. So Michigan has already internally had some of those discussions, like, why are we making the same revenue share as a Northwestern? Because we carry we carry the smaller schools in the Big Ten, like an Ohio State. So yeah, I would say that's also a natural progression that we will see down the road, just like a CBA and a players union. I think it's going to head there. And I also, Joe Klatt, I think, brings up a great point. He says, yeah, there's going to be more expansion. This is why Florida State wants to get in the Big Ten, because they see this problem where you're going to be revenue sharing. They're only getting like what? I think it's like $35 million a year in their TV deal. That's not even close to what the Big Ten is going to be getting. So they're you could see Florida State joining the Big Ten. They're already trying. We'll see where it goes. But Big Ten, or Joe Klatt says you're going to start seeing teams leave the Big Ten because they're going to get kicked out.
Well, that was going to be another point of mine, that just because you're in the Big Ten or the SEC doesn't mean you're holding up, your distribution slice. Right. If you're Vanderbilt or Indiana, you're nowhere near the commodity that Florida State, Miami, Clemson, and other schools are in other conferences, lesser conferences. You're not pulling in that kind of money. Shoot, Rutgers, unless they're playing Ohio State or Michigan, they're relegated to the Big Ten network their entire season because the networks know that they don't choose to put them on CBS, NBC, or Fox. Mm-hmm. My other thought in this is if, for example, Michigan's bringing in $20 million, how do they distribute that to the players? Does every scholarship athlete get the same amount of money, or who's making a determination on the value of each individual player?
Yeah, so I think you will see different systems amongst different universities. Some might do a flat team-based salary, and others might do a tiered system. I know right now the Michigan collectives, as we speak, are looking into creating a tier system that will fit players into some type of pay scale structure, because they're running into problems with depth chart players demanding more money, which we just saw a couple players into the portal who were lower on the depth chart. So I know Michigan's currently discussing a tiered system right now. It's not in place yet, but I know that it's probably highly probable that will be in place soon.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it was today or recently we were kind of talking about I think it was today. Actually, it's been a long day. Tight end university, offensive line university, that sort of thing. Maybe you see teams kind of do that. Maybe you see an Iowa say, "Hey, we've got a pipeline in tight ends, and we're going to pay them in a certain level that's going to be different, and that it's going to be tight end university. We're going to be tight end university, something like that." I would think that Michigan would. I think they would pay for players that are stars more than they would pay for players that are not. I would think that's how Michigan would go anyway. So.
Yeah, I know seniority is going to matter. I know that's, and obviously production. I think that's how Michigan wants to do their tiered system. But I think you're right, where it comes like a freshman, how do you equate a 5-star? Like, we're in a gray area. I mean, I don't think anything's concrete right now. I think a lot of it can be subjective, and teams are going to make bad purchases, right? They're gonna invest in players who don't pan out, and it's going to happen because you can't bat 1,000. So this is where like a Sean McGee, who's now the general manager at Michigan, this is why he was brought in, because we have an evolving athletic landscape, and this is what they got to do. They got to adapt and they got to evolve now.
Now, there's a few positives here, because I'm guessing that many of the people that are listening in the chat right this second, and others that will watch the record on this, probably have the same general lean. When I say lean, I'm not talking about my principles or my thoughts. I'm talking about more about my intestinal fortitude about this, my stomach for it, which is not too tolerant, just because basically collegiate sports has been contaminated for a long time, but it's officially contaminated. And we're in a very awkward position, as TJ is pointing out, most notably because a lot of things need to be worked out, because basically what's happened is, going way back generations, you had athletics as an extension of the university. Athletics were simply just another activity. And then, of course, it became more and more popular, and crowds started showing up, and then television got involved, and it became a business. But the framework and the legislation and the structure was never business minded. It was academics minded, but it became a big business, and that it is clashed. But a couple positives, I think, for the average fan to take away, that's sick of the transfer portal, sick of players being able to leave whenever they want, and also opting out of postseason games, bowl games, would be that can all be worked under contract. And you can have that guarantee that a freshman is going to sign, whether it be a 1-year contract or a 2-year contract or a 3-year contract or whatever, and stay at the school. And also that they're committed to play for their team throughout the remainder of the season, all the way to the end.
Yeah. Go ahead, Ferris.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you don't want to have to re-recruit players year after year after year. That it makes sense to have some sort of contract that lasts, that's favorable for both sides. Some level of security, but as long as certain criteria are met. Maybe that has to be that you have to be on the team, or maybe it even means that you have to be a contributor to some degree. Then you'll keep getting paid. That it makes total sense for it to be a 2-way deal that lasts more than one year. Would be my point of view.
Yeah, I feel like I heard pretty recently that there was an NIL deal done with a player where it is in their NIL deal where they do have to participate in a bowl game if they make it to a bowl game. I'm trying to remember what player that was. But I think you are starting to see teams go that path with the commitment to bowl games. I haven't seen anything where it's like, okay, a 2-year commitment. We haven't seen that yet. I don't even know if you can pull that off without a players union. I don't know if we're there yet. I think that might have to be the next step after a revenue share. But there's no question that's what's needed in college athletics. I mean, listen, we're semi-pro now. It's not even amateur sport anymore. It's just where we are. Unfortunately, the rules and regulations in college athletics is behind the current state of the sport, and now we're playing catch up. And the reason why it's so bad is because unfortunately leadership has failed us. NCAA has failed us. The institutions have failed us because the dirty little secret is the institutions don't even want to pay the players. They don't want to lose money out of their athletic department. A lot of them are even reluctant to do NIL because it takes donors away from their funding and their fundraising for new buildings and practice fields or whatever, right? So, we're just in a place where there's a fork in the road and decisions have to be made.
I guess I can stomach all this if, in fact, these players and part of their deal, because it is a university, is that they uphold all the expectations of being a student.
What do you mean? Elaborate. What do you mean? Like, so as
Go
long
to
as
class, take tests, do homework, write papers, pass classes.
I mean, aren't they already doing that though, right? So,
well, I'm not saying that they're not doing that. And I
Right.
think the knock on the athletes is that more of them are not doing that than truly are, because most of them
Yeah.
should realize that they're not going to play in the NFL.
Right.
And what could ultimately hurt a lot of these guys if they're not really understanding of the situation is making $75,000 a year for 3 years and thinking that they've got, they're on top of the world when they're nowhere close to being an NFL player. And then they're sitting out on the street, and sure, they made a little change and some decent money for a 20-year-old. Certainly, there's nothing wrong with that. But if they didn't parlay that into a career other than playing in the NFL, then they mismanage their money, as we've seen many times. So that could be the fool's gold for a lot of sad stories upcoming.
Oh yeah. Well, that's
Yeah.
cool.
I mean, one little side thing here. I mean, you think about the G League, and you think about most college basketball teams, and I think the G League has better players now, probably. Than there are very few college basketball teams that have better players than kind of an average G League team. But nobody watches the G League. There's the affiliation with the university that makes college basketball what it is, leading up to the tournament, obviously, and all of that. So there's got to be a tie. If it's not a tie, then you kind of drift into this. Is this minor leagues for football, or what is this actually that we have? And if there is no tie to the university, that's what it turns into, right? So you would think that would be an important aspect of this, that there needs to be some association with the university. You should be able to take a class where there's a Michigan football player in it, if in theory, right? So
let's say that's not the case. Let's say that's not a requirement. Now, we do know, again, I don't know what percentage we're going to place on that the majority of these players, well, I don't know if the league becomes so exclusive that there's only 32 teams, maybe it's going to be a pretty low percentage of players that are committed to going to class and doing all those things because they know they're not going to the NFL. Of course, the more exclusive that becomes, the more concentration of future NFL players are going to be in this league. Then let's say we get to a point where that's not an expectation, that's not a requirement, and there's always going to be those players that take advantage of that ability to go to class, take tests, learn things, and they'll take advantage of that regardless of how good they are and how much of a future they have. But let's say that's a small portion, and there are just players who show up to practice and they're just connected to the university by putting on a jersey and gear every Saturday and playing football. Then you have a minor league sport, as you've just outlined, Ferris, and you have an inferior sport to the NFL. So for you two, what is your incentive and draw to watching Michigan football rather than just watching a far superior product on Sunday?
Well, I'd say for me, I'm still all in. I don't care. Morally, I don't know, maybe my morals are a little thin, but like I don't care if these kids go to class or not. I don't care if kids get paid. Like, and like I know I'm rooting for a team that's very moralistic in Michigan because they do care. Admissions matter, grades matter, and going to class matters. But and that's okay. Like I don't have anything against that either. I'm fine either way how the path it goes. But if it does end up being where these kids are strictly athletes or employees and not students, which is what you're alluding to, Mark, um, I don't give a damn. Michigan's my team. I'm still gonna ride with them. And if you look at the other semi-pro leagues like the USFL or the UFL, um, the quality of product just isn't there. And like to Ferris's point when he brought up the G League, which is a great little case study we can look at on the basketball side of things. Well, the NBA actually just canceled Team Ignite, which was the G League version of high school players that want to go into the G League. They ended that, and the reason why they ended that is because they cannot fill that team with enough competitive players because the players are now coming back to college basketball for NIL. They're now making enough money through NIL where playing for Team Ignite, who Scoot Henderson, if anyone follows the NBA, Scoot Henderson was drafted, I think, 3rd overall last draft. He came from Team Ignite. So that team's now gone. So that pathway, so those kids are going to either have to go overseas or go back to college. So I just think that if we go down the path of employee and not student athlete, for me, and I know, Mark, maybe you're more old school, so it matters more. But for me, like, as long as you're representing the university, I'm good. Because a lot of these kids, like, for example, like I'm a fan of college hockey. These kids are only there a year and they're gone. They play juniors and then they like in Michigan, for example, because Michigan's basically a feeder school for the NHL. These kids are there for 1 year, like Owen Powers, drafted 1st overall a year ago in the draft. 1 year and they're gone. So are they really student athletes anyways? No, they're just there for development, you know?
I understand what you're saying. I mean, here's my counter argument to it, and maybe Mark's on my side. I'm not sure. We'll see. but those are rare. Those players are rare. The vast majority of players are there to play the sport and then do something else in the future. I would want college football players to have some association with the university, literally be students, literally only have 4 or 5, maybe more if there's COVID, but 4 or 5 years of the time at the university, and then they move on to do something else, whether that's professionally in the sport or they move on to do something else. I mean, I'll give you an example like Jake Butt. That's an excellent example of somebody who had a major injury and then tried different things and then eventually kind of stuck and now he has kind of a broadcasting career. So and I'm sure a lot of people are in non-sports as well. So part of my joy of watching Michigan is to watch these athletes see what the next step is for them and kind of feel like, okay, they got a Michigan degree that means something. That's my point of view. Mark, I'd be interested to hear yours.
Well, I'm very much in line with this. So, first of all, if I see the grin from TJ. So, if I had the resources to do this and the time, and I knew that the video viewership would pay off, this is what I would do. I would love to see somebody do this. I would take a school like Michigan. I would want to take all the schools in the Power 5, the Power 4 now, and go back about 10 years, take all the starting players, and really any backups that were impactful, played a lot, meaningful snaps, guys that played the significant portion of the games, and determine how many of them made an NFL roster and to what degree. I don't know what that percentage is. It seems like when Ohio State and Michigan are out there, it seems like everybody's a pro. It seems like We've gotten to the point where, shoot, they're all going to make it. Almost seems like almost everybody who's starting is going to be in the NFL at that level. And of course, we're talking about 2 of the top 3 or 4 programs in the country. So we're not talking about the Indiana, Illinois game, but still, they have their fair share of pros playing on the field. So to your point, Ferris, and I draw back to this experience very often. Jim Delaney, former Big Ten commissioner, I saw him at a small luncheon. So we're talking like 20 people having lunch. Fortunate enough, twice at ESPN to sit there with Jim Delaney, and he would speak for about an hour. Then he sat down. We had lunch, so I couldn't talk directly to the guy like one-on-one, but I could ask a couple questions. Mm-hmm. And he basically, in both of these talks, discussed his time in North Carolina as a varsity basketball player and said, this is what it looked like. And the way Jim Delaney led the Big Ten, you could very much see that he was in constant conflict between, I'm running big time athletics, I'm running a business, but I'm also trying to keep the academic portion of this. And I'm trying to merge both of these, and it's becoming more and more difficult because he said, as a varsity basketball player at North Carolina, so this is big time, he's going to Final Fours, this is in the late 60s, he said it was basically an extension of high school. You went to practice after your classes for 2 hours, you may have a couple of meetings during the week, but it's very much a extension of school, and you're a student. Sure, you have to do a lot of traveling during the season and all of that, but it's and then it's obviously, as it's become more and more competitive and there's been more money involved, the guidelines of how many hours you can dedicate to it have been stretched and stretched and stretched, and everything has been stretched. And basically, these athletes have a job now. It is a job for them to watch all the film, lift weights. There's no off season for the most part, and it's a job. I would love. This is never going to happen because there's too much money involved. I'd go back to 1955, and this would just be simply an extension of their student athlete role. And there was still an NFL in 1955, and they still recruited and drafted players from the collegiate ranks. They just wouldn't be nearly as good as they are now because it's a job. But we're never going to go there. So forget that. But that's what I would want.
Well, I'm not there. Athletes should get paid. I'm totally fine with all of that. They should make what they want,
Okay.
And go ahead.
That's not what I said. So nothing I said had anything to do with money. I believe that they should be paid. Absolutely, they should be paid. They've earned it. They are generating the income. So I would like it to be 1955 in that sense, to keep it somewhat pure. It wasn't completely pure in 1955. But here we are in 2024, and the sport generates so much money. I don't believe that the athletes shouldn't be paid. I'm a capitalist and a patriot to the hilt. I believe that they should be paid. They're earning money. They're working a job. It was ludicrous for everyone in the world to be able to make money except for college athletes for all that time. Shoot, there are 15-year-olds on TikTok making hundreds of thousands of dollars making stupid videos. Everybody should be able to make money. The market should determine how much you're worth. So I absolutely do agree with that. But I would like there to be a continued connection between, this is part of the requirement. You are a student athlete, and yes, you are being paid. You could be paid $10 million a year, but you still have to fulfill the requirements of a student, because that's why you're here.
You want the nostalgia of college football to maintain.
None of that I just stated impacts me. I don't know if they're going to class, passing tests, what's going on, getting their grades fixed. I have no idea, but I would like to think that that's happening.
I mean, unless you're North Carolina and some other schools like that, who, you make up classes. But I mean, I know like Michigan, for example, they just had a bunch of issue on the basketball team of kids not passing grades and being suspended for away games by Doug McDaniels, the point guard. So, I mean, there are some schools who uphold that, and I'm sure there will still be some schools that uphold that, like Michigan. But I mean, if we think North Carolina is the only one making up classes, I that's just not it. I mean, I think you'll have your universities, Mark, that will do it, and I think you'll have your universities that just don't care. That's it.
Maybe
just
I have the same psyche at my age that I did when I was first watching college and NFL football when I was 8 or 9 years old. I was an Ohio State fan, not because my family told me to be an Ohio State fan. I didn't know any Ohio State fans. I just became an Ohio State fan. I couldn't even tell you why.
Yeah.
I just gravitated to it. I think one reason was, oh, I'm an Ohioan. I live here. These players mostly are recruited from these high schools and play here. I don't think I processed it quite like that when I was 8 years old, but something told me, okay, these guys are Ohioans. They play on my state team. I'm going to root for this team. I was a Dallas Cowboys fan in the NFL probably because I had the mindset they're professionals. I don't care. They have the flashy uniforms and they're really good. They got the coach I like and the cheerleaders and they're America's team. I'm going to like them. I don't have any ties to the Cleveland Browns or the Cincinnati Bengals. And I kind of differentiated that in my mind at the time. And I guess I'm still the same way.
Yeah. I mean, I can relate. I mean, Michigan, like at a young age, I remember watching the Rose Bowl in '97 as a kid. So, in Charles Woodson, like, how do you not become a Michigan fan watching Charles Woodson? So, yeah, I mean, I don't. I think it's Mark. Here's a question. You want these kids to still be student athletes. You want them to go to class and do everything that the way it's been. But how do you know whether they are or they aren't? Like, isn't that more just a false belief in your mind where you're just like, where you want it to be true, but it doesn't mean it is?
And how are they University of Michigan football players then?
Because they put on the helmet and they play for the university. And after 3 years or 4, they get
for
their
whose
degree.
university? Not their university.
Well, I mean, look, all right. So when I went to college, for example, I had some classes with some football. I went to Eastern Michigan, and I had some classes with some of the football players. And I'm going to be honest with you, man. The tutors, they were there taking the notes, and they did a lot of their papers. Like essentially what happens is a football player will do a paper, right? And then the tutor will then proofread it and make it good, and then they'll review it and be like, all right, this is what I did. And then they'll submit it. Like the tutor, and I know that happens at bigger programs too, because I've talked to some former players, and it's more or less like you go to class when you're able, but the tutors and they're given those programs or those resources, they do a lot of the work, man. I mean, that's just, but some of these kids, like there's some of these, like, and I know you know this, Mark, some of these kids go for these degrees that are not much of a degree, but then there are some that get serious degrees. They get the engineering degree or the doctorate or whatever, right? I mean, I think it's just some will and some won't. It's just like some universities will enforce it and some won't,
I guess if you have your neighborhood pickup basketball team and I have mine and we take pride in our neighborhood and you take pride in your neighborhood and we play you and we find out your 4 best players are all from, across town somewhere and you just shipped them in just to put the jersey on.
Yeah.
Then I don't feel so bad about losing. I figure they're really not any better than us.
Well, you had a player, Cardell Jones, a famous quote, Mark.
Sure.
No, I'm not saying like that as a negative. I'm just saying, like, did that make you like college football any less? Because I think he said the truth out loud. He's not the only one who feels that way, and that's not the only school. Like it's not an Ohio State thing at all. I mean, I think the reality of college athletics is a lot of them are only there. Like they do go to school and they are getting benefit, but I think they're there for sport, man. Because you're bred at a young age to be an athlete. That's what matters.
And there's something wrong with, because colleges and universities are built to prepare people for life.
Yeah.
To give them a trade, a skill, and theirs is football playing. Now, some of them, it's borderline as to whether, just like there are some that make the accounting program, but determine after a year, I don't have the brain to do this and pull this off, or whatever the field. It's the same in football. You can barely make the team, but I'm not going to make this a profession, so I'm going to have to do something else. But for the ones that are talented enough and stay healthy and do all those things, then they are that is part of their profession. But just like all those other, just like the skilled physicist and the skilled financier had to take all these other electives and classes that had nothing to do with their chosen field, then the football player has to do the same thing.
Yeah, to rack up debt, but I mean, unless you're in scholarship, right? But but my premise stands though. Like, did that make you like Ohio State less when Cardell Jones said that?
It's probably a small part of me.
But that
Not
national
not
title
me,
felt good.
not Ohio State, but just in
Yeah.
general, just thinking, okay, he's just a representative of tons of
Yeah.
athletes. Yes.
And he won you a national title though. You know, that player, right? So I mean, he helped, third string quarterback, right? So, I mean, I just think I think that's already happening, Mark. And I don't know, like, I think maybe you feel it's going to be more magnified or more, a more aggressive case down the road where less players are. I think in my opinion, though, honestly, I think the schools will still be schools. I think I think the athletes will still go to school. I just think some will take it more serious than others. Like I'll tell you this right now. I don't think Texas A&M gives a shit because I know they have academic problems all the time at A&M. So with their athletes. So because there's been some kids that Michigan's reached out to and there's academic issues all the time with them. So I don't know. I just think some schools it's a priority and some it won't be.
Well, at least for the football players, they can turn it into a career at the NFL level, or just make enough connections and professional connections that they can be helped down the road, despite not getting a legitimate degree. That's more legitimate in some ways than these other athletes who play non-revenue sports who don't give a crap about going to class. And I don't know what's going through their brains because they're really not preparing themselves for anything. So at least in football, there's a payoff, whether it's in the NFL or it's with NIL when you play at this level of program.
Right. Plus, there's life lessons in sports, right? So, I mean,
well, sure.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I think I don't know if too much will change, Mark. I don't know if it'll really. If we look at football today, and we say this revenue sharing model's in place, and there is a CBA, and let's say there's a Super League of 45 teams. I'm not sure that the environment of college sports is much different for the athlete or for the student. I don't know. That's something to, I guess, observe, but I don't know if it changes too much, Mark, to be honest.
And then before Ferris has anything else to say, the last, we don't have to stop the conversation if you guys have more and more to say about this. I guess the other portion of this that I don't know that seems to never be brought up, that I would love to get some answers on, is the taxpayers portion in all this. So if a football program or any sports team, Iowa women's basketball this past year, whatever the sports team, if they are sustainable on their own and self-sufficient, then at what level are all these other athletic programs being funded by taxpayers? I guess I have an issue with that to a certain extent as well.
Yeah.
Michigan has sort of separate, not every school does this, but Michigan has separated the entire athletic department, as I understand it, from the academic wing, from a financial accounting perspective. But not every school is like that, so that's a really good point.
All right, we've got some super chats coming in here. We've got our buddy Nick stopping by. Says Alex Orji is going to ravage Ohio State's flaccid defense. Well, Nick, I don't know how accurate your predictions are. You'll have to keep track of those. Maybe I'll start doing that for you. But thank you for the super chat. We appreciate that.
I will say, I saw again that there were some comments about Alex Orji not being able to complete a forward pass. I believe that Alex Orji can complete a forward pass. And I also think that he can get to the 60% number that we've been talking about. I think TJ was a little bit higher, maybe. Do we say 60 or 65?
62.
62. I'm sorry.
62.
62%. That is the magic number. We want to get
Yeah.
to 62% completions with Alex Orji.
If John does not lead this show in this direction, I do have a request, and you guys, of course, you guys can do whatever you want. It's your show, but sometime in August, make stats predictions for the offense and the defense, like TJ just did.
Yeah, let's do that. That'd be fun.
So
JJ
Alex
was at
Orji,
72%. So, we're not aiming for the, moon here. 62% seems reasonable.
I believe Alex Orji can complete a downfield pass because Colston Loveland has a wide wingspan. So
Yes, even complete a 10-yard pass, and then you have 10 yards of yards after catch, and then you've got a 20-yard pass there, right? So
we've got Blue Wolverine. I see you, Mark, sporting that blue shirt. Go blue. Well, it's kind of a UCLA blue. So I'm bringing UCLA colors to the Big Ten here. Guess what I'm doing?
Yeah, I see a comment here about 72% was a misleading number for JJ. I believe JJ completed 240 passes last year, and I think that was it was the lowest out of the 6 quarterbacks, but not by much. I think Drake May was 262 or something. It was only like 20 something more passes completed. JJ did play in more games, but he should get credit for playing in those more in all of those games because he had to win games to keep playing, right? So just a thought there that it wasn't like this was a Air Force or whatever. This wasn't a service academy offense. Michigan's offense actually ran less than Alabama. Alabama passed. Alabama passing. I think it was at 62%, and running was at 62%. Michigan was at 61%.
I just know that Michigan was 14th in the nation in fewest pass attempts per game, which the formula worked. So that's not being critical at all.
Yeah.
And the other thing to keep in mind when people look at individual stats and team stats at the end of the season, especially for a team that had to go through a conference championship game and 2 playoff games, is that the more games you play, and you're playing the best teams in the country at the end, the more legitimate your team stats are. That if you are able to uphold, as Michigan did, the number 1 defense, I don't know if they were statistically number 1, but they were very close in just about every major or advanced metric statistically on defense, that becomes more and more difficult. The better teams you play added on to the schedule. So they didn't obviously just play 12 games like other teams, or 13 games with a bowl game against a 7-5 team. And then that was the end of the season. They got tacked on more additional difficult assignments to legitimize their ranking.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. If we have a second, I wanted to post something. Actually, there was an idea from Dennis Fithian from Maize and Blue Review that I kind of took. Let me see if I can post that. Hang on one second. All right. Is this showing up for you or not? I don't actually see it. So
no, I think I have. Let's see. There we go.
Rights. Okay, sorry.
We still don't see it. I added it to the stream, but there's.
All right. Hang on one second. Let me try another way here. I just wanted to kind of show something that I thought was really interesting with. Yeah, looks like I'm having trouble with that. So hang on one second. All right, carry on. If I can pull it up, I will right now. But basically, we were talking about JJ. JJ's incoming rankings as a player was 25th. His draft position was 10th. So, Dennis tried to do this kind of formula where, hey, their incoming rankings, compare it with a draft position. Was there an improvement? And I'll just kind of verbalize it. So JJ's was modest. He went from being, quote unquote, the 25th best incoming player to number 10 in draft position. Still amazing that he was able to do that. Okay. But then you have somebody like Mike Sanistril, who went from his incoming ranking was 589. This is Dennis Vistian's number. He got a draft position of 50, which was an improvement of 539 slots, if you look at it that way. Michigan had 2 players in the top 100 in the incoming rankings, and those were J.J. McCarthy, Junior Colson. And, they ended up getting 7 in the top 100 in terms of draft position. So just kind of a way to look at is Michigan sort of raising players up from their incoming rankings versus, where they ended up getting drafted. Is it apples to apples? Well, maybe the bar of being drafted is even higher because you're not just competing with, players that came in to school at the same time. You're competing with different levels of players who might be seniors or graduate students, as well as juniors and seniors, right? So, if you kind of look at it that way, Chris Jenkins would be another one. His incoming ranking was 502, and his draft position was 49. So I will do a deeper dive into this, but I just wanted to kind of point out that actually 5 players kind of jumped kind of out of nowhere in that kind of that nebulous, large 3-star-ish kind of category into being drafted. So what does it mean to be drafted? Ladarius Henderson, Michael Barrett, they got drafted very late. Are they going to make the team, so to speak? I don't know how to judge. To me, it's a success if you get drafted, right? So, and these players were not even in the top 400 players coming in. So a couple other examples. Would be, this kind of sparked the idea of we could maybe do this analysis for Michigan, for Ohio State, for some other schools as well. I thought Dennis was onto something. He sort of verbalized it in a recent podcast, and I started looking into the numbers, and it is kind of dramatic. All of these players that got drafted did go up from where they were in terms of incoming rankings.
That's interesting. So it's such a simple comparison. I'm sorry I didn't think of it because it's so obvious, but that's never crossed my mind, and I've never heard of anyone doing that. And it seems fairly legit, not completely. There are flaws to it, but that's a pretty legit comparison. So that was the 2021 recruiting class.
Well, okay, so this is just players that got drafted this year.
Oh, and where they were in their year, regardless of the year. So
versus where they were when they came in. Now, in terms of the 2022 class, and I'll make a separate video on this so that there's more content. but what I'll say is that the 22 class had Will Johnson, Zeke Berry, Derek Moore, Keon Sabb. Those were the ones that were in the top 100. Will Johnson, arguably, I don't even say arguably, he's probably going to be, if he doesn't get injured, going to be an All-American. Zeke Berry, probably a question mark starter. Let me just put it that way. Derek Moore, starter. Keon Sabb is a starter, but not for Michigan. He's a starter for Alabama. That class also had Tyler Morris, Mason Graham. Tyler Morris was 104 ranked according to 24/7. Mason Graham 209. So then you have another starter, another Mason Graham, All-American question mark. I'll just put that there. Then you've got Colston Loveland, who is not ranked, or in this ranking, he was not ranked. I think there's probably some official ranking somewhere. Kenneth Grant, Jaden Denegal, Alex Orji, all of those players were not ranked in the, in top couple hundred.
247.
But they're going to be starters. Colston Loveland, Kenneth Grant, Mason Graham, all of those three could be All-Americans. I mean, I think it's reasonable to think, arguably, I think I mentioned this on one of your morning shows, that arguably I think Michigan might have 4 players that could get drafted in the first round. They only had one, JJ, in 2024, but in 2025 they might have 4. So, I thought this class seemed like that 2022 class seemed like huge production out of it, and players coming out of nowhere to be, really maybe even the best in their position. All those names that I just described. I don't know what you think, TJ, on that.
Yeah, no, that class, without question, is a foundation for the success we had. I mean, Mason Graham as a freshman defensive tackle had an impact. That is so rare. Another player from that class who I think is going to have a big year this year is Marlon Klein. So, I mean, I think you can actually look at that class and say that was the class that helped take it over the top to make us a national champion. I think that's actually a good point. I've never analyzed that. I haven't looked at that class like that till just now. And you're right. I mean, when you look at the classes that led up to the first Big Ten title, the second, and then obviously our third national title, the 2022 class, which made everybody sophomores this past season. I mean, the impact. I mean, that's why, most rivals or even most fan bases who may not pay attention to Michigan are like, oh, they just had 13 guys drafted. They're not returning any talent. The COVID year's eligibility is over. Michigan's going to fall flat on their face. Well, like you pointed out, and I believe, I don't know if it was Pro Football Focus, but there's some media outlet that does the top 50 players for next year's draft, and Michigan has 4 of them. Ohio State has 6 of them, by the way. But Michigan's still one of the top teams with the highest level of talent for this upcoming season for the draft. So I just think, the 22 class is obviously, you could argue, a cornerstone class. And I would argue the JJ class is another cornerstone class because that had a lot of impact players. But I wanted to actually touch on Ferris. I don't know if you've seen this because you're not on Twitter, but there's actually a chart going around on Twitter. It's by an account called College Football Data, and they have a chart with team recruiting and NFL draft from 2017 to 2000 or until 21. It's actually a pretty interesting chart. I'll send that to you. Mm-hmm. But I think that actually hits on the analysis you're looking for in terms of where classes ranked versus where they're drafted. It's a pretty interesting chart. I could send it to you now, Mark, if you wanted to pull it up. I could link it to your Twitter.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it sort of points to this idea that Michigan can also find. I mean, there is development, so we can pat ourselves on the back for, hey, we're developing players, but maybe some of this is how players are ranked. They're missing something. Michigan is getting something, finding some secret sauce that other programs are not seeing in some of these players. Like how does Kenneth Grant and Colston Loveland not even crack the top 200?
Right.
How does that happen? So
yeah. Well, I'll tell you exactly how. So for example, Colston Loveland, the reason why he went so under the radar is because one, he's from Idaho, and there's a lot of flaws with the ranking. See, I have a lot of issues with 247's ranking process, and I know they actually have a high hit rate. If you look at what's drafted versus their rankings, it's actually pretty high and it's respectable. But a lot of issues I have with their ranking system is, one, if kids are not local to where, a lot of these kids get ranked at the Under Armour events or the Nike events or the Adidas camps, right? And if these kids do not participate in those camps, they don't get ranked. So we had a tight end by the name of last class. He's highly ranked. I can't remember his name right now. But he had a passing in his family, and he really didn't want to do any of the classes and or any of the camps. Brady Prescorn. So if anyone knows who Brady Prescorn is, he's a incredibly talented tight end who will be an impact player at some point. So, he was going through some family stuff and he shut down his recruitment. He committed to Michigan in March. He went from a borderline 5-star player and he fell all the way to, let's see, 225. And let me just tell you, if you watch his highlight tape, it wasn't the play on the field that, when you don't go to camps, you don't get rated. And then when you don't get rated, you drop. So Kenneth Grant, for example, a lot of the 3-tech and 0-tech players, they don't get ranked as highly in the 247 system because they go the way the recruiting services work is they base your ranking on your likelihood of being drafted. So players like running backs or your defensive tackles, your interior defensive linemen, or your guards, they don't get ranked as highly in the rankings, whether they're extremely talented or not, because they're not projecting them to get drafted above a 3rd round grade or whatever, or even like 5th round. So that's my issue with the ranking system. I think they should, in my opinion, this is a pet peeve of mine. I'm kind of going down a road here. They should rank these players based on college projection, not NFL projection, but they do it based on NFL projection.
And I agree with you, TJ, for this one simple reason. Their audience are college football fans who care about the recruiting rankings based on what they project the championship pursuit to look like. They are looking at the recruiting rankings thinking this is how good my team's going to be based on these recruiting rankings. And that's what they care about, not who gets drafted and how high.
Right. I mean, how many times you see a player who thrives in college? Maybe he's undersized, whatever. But when he gets to the NFL, he's not, he obviously doesn't translate. But like when you look at him as a high school prospect, that kid will kill it like a Mike Sanders still. He will crush it at a college level. Right now, thankfully, he was able to build his stock and he was drafted high. But there's tons of players who are undersized and they get looked down on because they're not an NFL prospect. But in college, they kill it. Now, we've actually seen a transition in the NFL where smaller quarterbacks are starting to get drafted, like your Kyler Murrays or your Bryce Youngs. But that used to be looked down upon,
Absolutely. Yeah, I completely agree with that in regards to them projecting the college productivity and not they're not playing to their audience. So doesn't make a lot
and
of
that's
sense to me.
is it that Michigan is finding these players, or is it that the ranking services are off, or is it that Michigan is developing these players? It'd be interesting to really kind of figure out which of those are the biggest factor.
Well, I mean, for one, I mean, we know for a fact development matters, and Michigan has one of the best developmental programs in the game. But I do know Michigan took an NFL approach to scouting high school prospects. Harbaugh built his scouting department to identify talent like you would in an NFL draft, finding like undercover, like diamonds in the rough, if you will. And Michigan, even to this day, even if anyone's paying attention to recruiting now, they're very particular in the players they extend scholarships to. So I think, and I'll tell you this too, Kenneth Grant, for example, Michigan didn't know what they had until he got in fall camp. When he got in fall camp, that's when Harbaugh made the comment, it was a gift from the gods, along with Mason Graham. So, sometimes you don't necessarily know how a player is going to translate until you see him in person, but Michigan has always been ahead of the curve on identifying talent, diamonds in the rough, and then developing them. And we're going to find out if Michigan can sustain that development under Justin Truss.
Yeah, and then there's the strength and conditioning piece too.
Right.
That that Michigan was doing it differently than everyone else with respect to strength and conditioning. And again, we'll see how that's different because Harbaugh is literally rewriting strength and conditioning at the pro level, where the conventional wisdom is these players, they make millions of dollars, they just work out on their own. They're not going to listen to some Marine captain, strength and conditioning coach, like they would at Michigan, right? So,
right. So if we look at this chart, Mark, I kind of feel like, or Ferris, I kind of feel like this is maybe not exactly what you were looking for, but I think it gives you an idea of draft rankings. You can click on the picture, Mark. It would probably expand. But you can get an idea of class ranking, right? And then you have the number of players drafted, and it shows, and you can probably explain it better than I can, Ferris, because you're the math guy, but
Yeah, so you get the average recruiting versus the number of draft picks. Now, I do hear Ohio State fans saying, well, does a 6th-round pick count or a 5th-round pick count? Don't they have to make the team? That sort of thing. Michigan did do a great job in terms of quantity in 2024. I believe that there'll be quality, meaning higher draft picks in 2025. I mean, in 2024, how many first? I think it was first 3-round draft picks were 7. So it was both quantity and quality. But
I personally can't imagine any Ohio State fan making that claim. I don't think that happens.
Well, does it count? Does it count that a player gets picked in the last round and that adds to the Michigan's total?
well, does Tom Brady count?
Yeah, good point.
I just know that after I saw what was the disparity between 2017, I don't know what was magical about 2017, but anyway, 2017 in this current draft, that Michigan had 3 or 4 more players drafted than Ohio State. And so I had that pushed in my, if it was just somewhere on Twitter, that's fine. But people felt obligated to push that in my direction and tag me on that over and over and over and over. So I took it upon myself to count 1st-round draft selections during that same time frame, and that was a different number.
Yeah,
I mean,
so
well, but again, like Ohio State really thrives on skill positions, and skill positions do get drafted higher. But I would also argue, like, Ohio State is, I think we will all agree, it is wide receiver U, and wide receivers do get drafted typically along with quarterbacks the highest. Now, I guess I'll make a counter argument against Michigan. Offensive linemen get drafted pretty high, and Michigan does not produce a lot of 1st-round offensive linemen. They just don't. And I don't know fully why that is. I mean, Zach Zenner, if he didn't break his leg, I don't think would have been a 1st-round offensive lineman, but I do think he would have went in the 2nd. I think Michigan, for example, they'd rather. I mean, don't get me wrong. Of course, you want 1st-round talent, but I think Michigan's happy with getting the 2nd round to 7th round guy because you're still getting that range of 30 to 250 best player in the country, right? You're still like, even if you're drafted in the 7th round, you're still one of the top 260 players in the world, and you're playing on a college football team, like whatever, whether they make the team or not, to be determined. But there's a lot of graphs or a lot of charts right now by Pro Football Focus where Michigan is leading in a lot of categories of most position players in the NFL, like tight end, offensive line. I think defensive line was on there. There's a few position categories where Michigan is leading the NFL right now. And you can credit those 5th-round picks.
Yeah, one other note is maybe you get an extra year out of them. Maybe you get an extra 2 years out of them. I think right. Some Ohio State fans that I interact with will say maybe you get another 6 years out of them is what they would say. Maybe they are still thinking that Michigan won the championship with 5th and 6th year players, but so. Every team had them, but I don't think Michigan was that different than any other team with respect to that. So,
all right, folks, we appreciate you being here at the Voice of College Football. Of course, follow TJ's work at Ronin Sports Talk, and also Ferris Khan's got some other videos headed our way. Correct, Ferris?
Yes. We'll cover both topics: that the incoming rankings versus draft position and the 2022 class. Some analysis of that as well.
TJ, anything you want people to know about what you've got going on?
No, I mean, just follow me on Twitter. Sometimes I'll put some recruiting takes on there, or if I get some intel that can't wait for the show on Tuesday. But nope, I'll be here. Me and John will be back next week. I'm sure Ferris will be around as well. And until next time.
And because John is such a better host than me in so many ways, he's a much better promoter of what we do here at the Voice of College Football. But I will add this, and sorry that everything turned from Michigan blue to black just because I had to go to a different folder, I guess. But we've got our college football, Wake Up College Football show every Monday through Thursday. That's at 8 a.m. Eastern time, everyone. So join us on the main channel. We enjoy seeing Ferris there. Most days, again, 8 a.m. Eastern time with Wake Up College Football. It's a little bit different of a take on college football. We do the old school, open up the newspaper, look at the headlines for the first time on the day. And so we check out the college football headlines. We figure out what's for breakfast and do things like that. And a lot of small talk there. And also, I've released my first in a series of all-time program rankings. So you Michigan fans would want to look out for that. This is, again, something I do just about every offseason. So we're not spitballing. This isn't going to be like all-time program rankings that you see in other destinations and outlets where people just kind of spitball based on number of wins or based on a couple different things. No, we're looking at winning percentage. We're looking at bowl wins. We're looking at major bowl wins. We're looking at AP poll points. We're looking at top 5, 10 finishes, ranked finishes. We're looking at NFL draft selections. We're looking at first round picks. We're looking at conference championships, national championships, consensus All-Americans. We are looking at award winners, not just Heisman Trophy, but every position group that there is an award for, of course, and there is every position group, both sides of the ball. So we look at all of that, and we've got a point system, and we've just released the Pac-12. Yes, we know that the Pac-12 doesn't exist, but a perfect time, of course, to put the Pac-12 history to bed. And we will be releasing the ACC here soon, and we will follow up all of these conference looks with live shows so you can tell me where I missed it. All right.
Michigan's number 1, right?
In the Big Ten?
Overall. Of course.
Well, let's see. We'll just have to wait and find out.
All right.
I don't know.
I'm in suspense.
We'll have to see if maybe a few things drag
You're
them
muted,
down.
Ferris. You're muted, Ferris.
Just remember, Mark, we have to compete with Ohio State in football, and then we have to also compete with MIT and the Solar Car team. So, there's a lot going on in Michigan. So
Okay.
maybe in your composite rankings, you can add some of this, these other things that we have to compete in.
I even went to the extent of breaking down records in the college football playoff era, 21st century, since 1970. I've got a nice little graphic that you guys would enjoy that I posted the other day. I'm sure you guys would love it, but I will spare it concerning the Ohio State-Michigan series. All right, everyone. Appreciate you being here at the Voice of College Football. We will catch you next Tuesday with these two and with John D'Adamo coming back. And that's every Tuesday at 8 o'clock Eastern. We'll see you next time.
All right.